Daniel had always believed that if he worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, stayed patient long enough, then life would eventually reward him with stability, with belonging, with something that felt like home. But New Mexico had shown him another truth. Every relationship that promised safety had dissolved under the weight of lies or fear. Every friend who once called him brother eventually stepped back, whispering excuses that left him standing alone. And worst of all, his own family, the people who were supposed to protect him, had decided that he was broken, someone who did not fit their narrow idea of what a son, a man, should be. After years of trying to pretend it didn't cut him open, after years of telling himself he was fine, something inside Daniel finally cracked. It wasn't a loud collapse. It wasn't screaming or throwing things across the room. It was quiet, almost invisible, like glass splitting beneath the surface before anyone notices the fracture. He realized that if he stayed in the city any longer, listening to well-meaning coworkers tell him he'd find someone, watching old friends look away when his name came up, waiting for family calls that never came, he would disappear. Not physically, but piece by piece, until there was nothing left. So he packed a bag. He didn't plan a grand departure. He didn't announce it. He told his coworkers he needed time off, asked a neighbor to water his plants, and slipped away before anyone had the chance to ask questions. No destination written down, no grand itinerary, only one rule. He needed silence. Real silence. Not the hollow kind that filled his apartment at night, but the kind you only hear in the mountains, where the wind itself feels ancient and the trees don't ask anything from you. The mountains loomed in the distance like a promise, rugged and untamed, and Daniel drove until cell service thinned out, until the last gas station disappeared in the rearview mirror. He wanted to reach a place where no one could call, no one could interrupt, no one could remind him of all the ways he had failed to meet their expectations. Every mile deeper into the wild felt like peeling away another layer of noise. Yet underneath the relief was something sharper, fear. What if he was wrong? What if there was no peace waiting for him in the silence? By the time he left his car at the trailhead, the sun was already starting its descent, bleeding orange and pink across the jagged horizon. Daniel adjusted the straps on his backpack, the weight biting into his shoulders, but he welcomed the ache. Pain he could control. Step after step, his boots pressed into the dirt path, carrying him farther away from the world he no longer trusted. Each sound grew rawer, clearer, the crunch of gravel, the whistle of wind through pines, the faint echo of his own breath. And yet, with every step, memories followed like shadows. Lovers who swore forever only to vanish when things grew difficult. Friends who grew uncomfortable with his truth and quietly chose distance. His father's voice, cold and sharp, telling him that no son of his would live that way. His mother's silence, which was worse than any insult. These voices did not stay behind in the city. They marched alongside him, louder with every heartbeat. Daniel quickened his pace, as though he could outwalk the ghosts. The trail climbed higher, the air thinning, the sky opening wider above him. But the ache in his chest remained, a knot that refused to loosen. He wanted to scream, but even in the wilderness, his voice felt stolen, like he didn't have the right to demand space in the world. Instead, he kept moving. Faster, harder, almost running. There was no one to watch him here, no one to ask questions, no one to remind him of who he had been. And yet, the absence of people was not as comforting as he imagined. The silence was immense, pressing in on him from every side. It was as if the mountains themselves were asking him, "What are you running from? And how long can you run before you collapse?" Still, he pressed forward. His lungs burned, his legs shook, sweat clung to the back of his neck, but he refused to stop. Because stopping meant facing everything he had left behind. Stopping meant admitting he was alone not just in this wilderness, but in life itself. As twilight bled into night, Daniel finally paused on a ridge that overlooked miles of darkened forest. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted with the last streaks of firelight from the setting sun. He dropped his pack to the ground, his breath ragged, his chest heavy. For the first time in years, there were no texts, no calls, no judgmental stares. Only the whisper of the wind, the cold settling into his skin, and a relentless question echoing inside him. If the world believes you're broken, what's left to prove them wrong? He stood there, trembling between exhaustion and defiance, caught in the fragile space where despair and hope wrestled for control. Somewhere deep inside, Daniel knew this was not just a hike. This was a test, and whether he survived it or not, nothing would ever be the same. The mountain path had grown narrow, winding between tall pines that blocked out most of the evening light. Daniel moved carefully, every step echoing in the silence. His thoughts pressed heavier than a pack on his back, looping endlessly through the betrayals and disappointments that had driven him here. He told himself he wanted silence, but silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of his own voice, sharp and accusing, reminding him of every time he had been left behind. It was in that heavy quiet that he first heard it, a steady rhythm, soft at first, like a distant drum. He stopped, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, deliberate, carrying through the trees. Hooves. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it, just the forest playing tricks. But then the rhythm sharpened, unmistakable. Someone was riding toward him. Daniel's pulse spiked. Out here, miles from cell service, he had not expected to meet anyone. The thought unsettled him. In the city, people passed each other every second, anonymous and forgettable. But here, in the wilderness, one stranger could mean anything. He adjusted the strap of his pack, his eyes darting to the curve in the trail ahead. Then the horse appeared, dark against the fading light, its rider tall in the saddle. The figure moved with unhurried confidence, not like someone intruding, but like someone who belonged to the land itself. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow until he drew closer. When at last Daniel saw his eyes, they were steady, deliberate, as though they had been watching long before the words were spoken. Evening, the man said, his voice low and carrying the kind of calm that came only from years of solitude. Daniel swallowed before answering. Evening. I wasn't expecting company out here. The rider tipped his hat slightly, his expression unreadable. Didn't plan to be. Lost the ridgeline. Thought I could cut through before dark. Looks like I wandered a little too far west. His tone was simple, almost casual, yet something about it held weight. He wasn't offering excuses, merely stating facts. There was no need to impress, no attempt to fill the silence with charm. He spoke like someone who had no interest in pretending. The man dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, like he carried the weight of the trail in his bones. Dust clung to his jacket, his boots worn in ways that spoke of long days and longer nights. He gave the horse a gentle pat before letting her rest near the trees. Name's Alex, he said finally, his eyes meeting Daniel's without flinching. Daniel, he answered, his own voice quieter than he intended. The silence stretched, but it was not empty. There was something charged in the stillness, something that unsettled Daniel more than raised voices ever had. He was used to people rushing to fill the void with lies, promises, or excuses. But Alex simply waited, watching him, as if patience itself was his language. When Alex asked if he could sit for a while, Daniel hesitated. His instinct, sharpened by years of disappointment, screamed for distance. Yet something in the man's steady gaze disarmed him. Against his better judgment, he nodded. They sat near the dying fire Daniel had left smoldering. The crackle of embers filled the space between them. At first, their words were spare, almost hesitant. Alex asked where Daniel came from. Daniel said the city. Alex admitted he never cared much for cities. Too much noise, too many people running toward things that never lasted. Daniel almost laughed because those words cut too close to his own wounds. Bit by bit, their words deepened. Not in detail. Neither man unfolded his entire story, but in truth. Alex didn't ask Daniel why he was there, and Daniel didn't ask Alex why he lived alone. Yet the pieces revealed themselves anyway, in small, unguarded moments. The way Alex spoke of his ranch, tucked far from the nearest town. The way Daniel confessed that the silence felt safer than people. There was no performance in their exchange, no desperate attempt to impress or hide. Instead, every sentence carried a weight that Daniel had rarely felt before. For once, he wasn't trying to decode hidden meanings or dodge carefully crafted half-truths. These words, simple as they were, felt more honest than all the elaborate promises his past lovers had made. The tension between them wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something sharper. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether the drop would kill you or save you. Daniel couldn't decide if Alex was a stranger to fear or someone who carried fear so deeply he had learned to live beside it. As the night darkened and the stars pressed closer, Daniel realized the most dangerous thing about Alex was not his silence, nor his solitude. It was that for the first time in years, Daniel felt the urge to stay and listen. And that terrified him more than the loneliness ever had. The morning came slowly, dragging pale light across the forest. Daniel woke to the crackle of embers still glowing faintly in the fire pit, and the steady sound of hooves shifting nearby. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw Alex crouched by the flames, pouring dark coffee from a battered tin pot, steam curling into the crisp air. The man looked as though he had been awake for hours, patient and unbothered, like the mountains themselves. Daniel sat up, rubbing the cold from his face. He felt oddly unsettled, not by danger, but by the quiet ease of sharing space with someone who didn't demand anything from him. The city had trained him to expect questions, obligations, hidden motives. Yet here, in the silence of the wilderness, Alex spoke only when words carried weight. "Coffee?" Alex asked simply, extending a metal cup. Daniel accepted, wrapping his hands around the warmth. He braced himself for the usual questions: why he was there, what he was running from, what he planned to do next. None came. Instead, Alex sat back on his heels, eyes scanning the ridge line as though the horizon held more answers than Daniel ever could. Hours slipped by in an unhurried rhythm. They walked part of the trail together, Alex guiding his horse carefully, Daniel pacing alongside. Their conversation was spare, yet Daniel found himself listening more closely than he ever had to anyone. There was no flattery, no polished stories, just fragments of truth. Alex admitted he lived on a small ranch, nothing grand, just a few dozen acres of land and a handful of horses. He didn't talk about it with pride or with complaint, only with the tone of a man who had chosen a life that fit him, whether or not anyone else approved. By midday, the sun was harsh above the trees, and Daniel paused to drink from his flask. Alex stopped too, glancing at him with a quiet deliberation that carried more weight than casual curiosity. "You look like you're carrying something heavier than that pack," Alex said. It wasn't an accusation, not even a question, just an observation. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He wanted to defend himself, to brush the comment aside, but the honesty in Alex's voice disarmed him. For once, he didn't feel the need to explain. He only nodded. That was enough. Alex gave a small nod in return, then let the silence stretch again. It was strange, Daniel thought, how silence with this man felt less like judgment and more like permission. As the day faded and they returned toward the clearing where Daniel had camped, Alex tethered his horse and leaned against a tree, arms crossed. His eyes lingered on the horizon before finally settling on Daniel. "You could come with me tomorrow," Alex said evenly, as though suggesting something ordinary. "To the ranch. It's nothing special, just quiet. A few horses, a place where you can breathe for a while." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. No one had invited him anywhere in months without attaching conditions, without expecting explanations or payment or promises. People always wanted something: time, energy, pieces of him he no longer had to give. Yet here was Alex offering space, not demands. Why? The word slipped out sharper than Daniel intended. Alex didn't flinch. "Because you look like you need somewhere to stand still. And my place is room." The simplicity of it unsettled Daniel more than any grand declaration ever could. He searched Alex's face for hidden meaning, but there was none. Just steady patience, the kind of patience that didn't chase or corner, only waited. Daniel looked away, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and longing. The invitation dangled in the air like a test. Was it safer to refuse and keep moving, clinging to solitude like a shield? Or was the real risk in stepping closer, in accepting a space where he might finally be seen? The fire snapped between them as night fell, sparks drifting into the dark. Daniel said nothing, but the question burned in his mind long after Alex had laid down to rest. He had come to the mountains to disappear, yet now, with one quiet invitation, the possibility of belonging felt closer than ever and infinitely more dangerous. The ranch was quieter than anything Daniel had known. Days stretched with a rhythm he could almost trust. The scrape of shovels in the morning, the low huff of horses, the smell of dust and hay under the burning sun. Evenings slipped into silence, broken only by crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. And through it all, Alex remained steady, never demanding, never pushing, simply moving through his world with a patience that unnerved Daniel more than any storm. Yet even peace can be dangerous. One morning, while Alex was out mending a fence, Daniel dug through his backpack, searching for a notebook. His phone, long forgotten at the bottom, blinked to life when he brushed against the power button. He froze. Notifications flooded the screen, dozens of missed calls, unread texts, emails. His chest tightened as he scrolled, but one message glowed brighter than the rest. A job offer. The very position he had chased for years in the city, one he thought he had lost forever, was as if he returned by the end of the week. For a long moment, Daniel sat in the quiet of Alex's small kitchen, the email burning on the screen. The old world had found him again, demanding an answer. And with it came the familiar chorus of voices he thought he had left behind. His father's scorn. No son of mine will throw his life away. His friend's careful distance. His ex-lover's easy betrayals. All of them whispered the same warning. Don't trust this. Don't believe in quiet men with quiet promises. By the time Alex returned, sweat streaking his temples, Daniel had hidden the phone back in his bag, though the weight of it pressed against his chest as though it were made of stone. You all right? Alex asked, glancing at him with those steady eyes. Daniel forced a nod. Yeah, just tired. The lie tasted bitter, but Alex didn't press. He only set down his tools and poured water into a chipped glass, sliding it across the table. The simple gesture unsettled Daniel more than any interrogation could have. Alex's honesty wasn't loud. It was in the way he noticed things, the way he never tried to force an answer, but gave space for truth to come when it was ready. That night, Daniel lay awake, the ceiling beams casting long shadows in the moonlight. His mind twisted in two directions. One path led back to the city, to long hours, paychecks, ambition. Everything he had told himself mattered. The other path was quieter, harder to define. It was Alex's voice saying, "It's nothing special, just quiet." It was the sight of him in the morning light, tending to the horses as though the act itself was prayer. Fear gnawed at him. Could he trust this? Could he believe that Alex's steadiness wasn't another illusion waiting to crumble? Every instinct born from years of rejection told him not to. And yet, when he remembered Alex's silence, silence that did not judge, silence that welcomed, something in him longed to stay. The next day, Daniel found himself at the gate, bag packed, phone heavy in his pocket. The world he had left behind called to him, offering everything he thought he once wanted. He gripped the post, heart racing, torn between ambition and something far more fragile. He remembered every betrayal, every sharp word, every slammed door. And then he remembered Alex handing him a glass of water without needing an explanation. The choice felt impossible. Yet Daniel knew that whatever path he stepped onto would change everything. Was safety found in the city he no longer trusted, or in the ranch that asked nothing of him except his presence? The wind pressed against his back, urging him forward. The quiet of the ranch pulled at his chest, holding him still. He stood suspended between two lives, between the world that had shaped him and the world that might save him. And for the first time in years, he realized that the real question wasn't whether he could trust Alex. It was whether he could finally trust himself. The decision came not with fireworks, not with a sudden burst of clarity, but with the quietest of gestures. Daniel had reached the gate, ready to walk away, when his body simply refused to move forward. His legs shook, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Fear of repeating the same mistakes. Fear of losing something before it even had a chance to begin. He turned back, slowly, and found Alex near the barn, throwing hay to the horses, his shoulders tense, his back too straight. The man didn't look up at first, as though he had already accepted Daniel's absence. When their eyes finally met, Daniel felt words gathering inside him, clumsy and fragile, but heavier than anything he had spoken in years. "I'm not leaving," he said, voice low but steady. Alex froze, then straightened, wiping his hands against his jeans. He studied Daniel carefully, as if testing the weight of that sentence. No triumphant smile, no questions, just silence. An invitation for Daniel to continue. "I don't know how long I can stay," Daniel admitted. "Maybe just a few days. Maybe longer. But I want to know what it feels like to stop running." And this, his voice cracked as he gestured to the ranch, the sky stretching endless above them, the air sharp with hay and dust. "This feels like a place I could breathe again." For a moment, the wind seemed to pause, holding the world still. Alex nodded once, slow and deliberate, as though sealing an unspoken agreement. No promises were exchanged, no vows made, only the recognition that something had shifted. The days that followed carried a strange weight, not heavy but grounding. Daniel learned the rhythm of the ranch, the slow ritual of feeding horses, the scrape of buckets against worn wood, the creak of the porch swing at dusk. He felt clumsy at first, out of place in this world of steady hands and unhurried patience. Yet Alex never corrected him harshly, never mocked his mistakes. He simply showed by doing, allowing Daniel to learn in silence. Each evening, as the sun lowered behind the hills, they would sit side by side on the porch. Sometimes they spoke about the land, about the sky, about nothing important. Sometimes they said nothing at all, and Daniel discovered that silence could carry more meaning than 1,000 words. In those moments, he began to understand. Love was not always about grand declarations or dramatic promises. Sometimes it was as simple as being invited to share the view, to witness the same horizon and believe together that tomorrow might hold more than yesterday ever did. Yet even in peace, doubt lingered. The voices from his past did not vanish. They whispered at the edges of his mind. "You can't trust this. It won't last. Nothing ever does." He feared waking one morning to find the ranch empty, Alex gone, the silence once again hollow. But each day that passed without abandonment chipped away at that fear. Each morning coffee, each patient glance, each unspoken acceptance felt like a small rebellion against the ghosts that haunted him. The intrigue was not whether Alex would betray him. Daniel had already lived that story too many times, but whether Daniel himself could choose differently this time. Could he allow stillness to feel safe? Could he risk believing in a quiet life when everything in his past told him to prepare for loss? The answer came in small pieces. The sound of Alex humming under his breath while fixing a fence. The way the horses nudged his arm when he lingered too long by the gate. The shared silence of watching the first stars appear in the evening sky. These were not dramatic victories, but they were victories all the same. Daniel had not promised forever, only a few days. But as he sat on that porch with Alex beside him, the sky painted gold and purple, he felt something he had never allowed himself before. Hope. Not the reckless hope of youth, not the desperate hope of someone begging to be chosen, but a quieter, steadier kind. Hope that staying could be enough. Hope that beginning again did not require forgetting the past, only refusing to let it dictate the future.